Hi, it's Charlton from the Delso Quartet, and this is an Angel Island bonus episode from my conversation with Emiko Ono, Director, Performing Arts Program at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. It is safe to say that without the Hewlett Foundation's 50 Arts Commission, there may never have been an Angel Island Oratorio. Though we didn't have space for this part of our conversation in the Angel Island season, we felt it was important to share this insight for up-and-coming artists, musicians, and anyone building a career or seeking funding for a large project in the arts. You can learn more about opportunities and initiatives with the Hewlett Foundation at hewlett.org, linked in the episode description in your listening app. And if you haven't listened to Season 1 of Sounds Current Angel Island, what are you waiting for? I encourage you to go back and listen to parts 1 through 4 to hear how this project came together, including the sleepless nights we had preparing our Hewlett proposal. And now, here's my conversation with Emiko. What would you recommend for artists who are aspiring to create larger projects and to find the resources necessary to make that happen?
That's a really tricky question. My advice for any artist is to follow their own artistic voice and develop their own artistic sensibility. And that's very hard to do in a society that doesn't value artists nearly as much as it ought to, because there's forces that narrow what they can do. But as much as a person can develop the sense of themselves, of what makes them unique, what turns them on as an artist, is a really important path to follow. I don't think it's more complicated. I mean, that's hugely complicated, but I don't think it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, and I think being able to do it long enough that you can establish that credibility.
Yeah, we could have a whole nother conversation about that. Who gets to do that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
What would I'm going to digress, but Charlton, what would your advice be? I mean, as someone who's lived it, is living it.
There's a couple of things. There were pieces of advice that I got early on. And one was, even when we were students still, and I remember this stuck out for me as a young person starting out. And the advice was, if you're not performing, you're amateurs.
Oh.
Which is like, oh. I hadn't thought about that at that point, because at that point we were just like, yeah, we're in training and we're rehearsing and we were just like focusing on getting better. But at the same time, you know, this person was saying that, well, you need to get yourself out there as well. And you need to be sharing what you have with people and finding ways to make that happen. And that always struck me as, it's like, oh, well, that because as artists, as you know, it's like we're often like it's like, it's not good enough. It's like, I need to work on this more. It's like it's not quite there yet, and yet you need to just sometimes just get it out there, and being able to, for us, since we're an ensemble, being able to hold it together. Really, I mean, just like finding ways to keep the interpersonal relationships healthy, and it's tricky. That's really tricky, but what we see. There are some groups who come along and they make a splash for some reason or other, and they skyrocket up. But that's like playing lottery. It's like sometimes it just, you hit something, you hit a chord and boom, off you go. But besides that, then the groups that I hear become successful are the ones who stay around. If they've been around long enough, being able to pursue their artistic vision for a long enough time, people eventually start to notice and recognize them for that. I don't think that's terribly different from what you said either, but it just, that having a clear vision, I think, is key, and being able to continue to pursue that to stay on course with that.
But putting it in an ensemble context really changes. It makes it exponentially more complicated because of the interpersonal nature of it.
Yeah.
And the many directions that 4 individuals have for their artistic work. Yeah, it really adds a lot of complexity.
Right, especially artistically, because I mean, there's some groups who may have a leader artistically, and we don't, and it's quite democratic. We sit down together, all 4 of us, and try to figure out what's that, or each person puts a hand on the Ouija board and we see where it goes. But I think we're getting better and better at that.
I would say so. Angel Island Oratorio is the dream come true for Hewlett 50 Arts Commissions. It is great artistry, incredible partners, deep connections to the Bay Area, but a kind of universality that reaches and speaks to many. You know, Angel Island Oratorio is a really difficult subject matter, and it requires a lot of determination to tackle those challenging stories, to pull them apart and put them back together in a way that makes them resonant and builds understanding, understanding of the legacies involved and what it really means to people now that, holds the past but shapes our current day perspectives. And that, I think, is part of what makes the piece brilliant, quite frankly, and why I think we've seen it go on.
Yeah.
I do think, not all art needs to spur a deep dialogue.
Exactly.
But it is a unique, not everyone can do it. Not all artists can do that. They're not equipped to. And Del Sol really is. But not every artist in arts group is set up to do such work. So it's great that you have chosen to take up that mantle.
And I think this project, working on this has changed Del Sol.
How so?
We always had a breadth of composers that we work with and artists that we work with. But I think when we began working on this one, we were also tapping into the local Chinese community here. We were engaging with them and working with these poets. The last Hoisan poets, this trio of elderly female poets who are just a blast and so fun. And amongst them, Jenny Lim, who was one of the original authors of Island, the book to bring the poems and to translate them and to publish that. And engaging, working with them and all the outreach stuff that we did, it gave us new avenues to connect with our direct community. And since then, we've opened up even more sort of Asian-focused work, both in terms of what we're performing, but also in terms of how we're engaging our local communities. And that has been a big step, like a really pronounced one where we didn't have that specificity in the past. And now it's like, this is a very important aspect of what we do.
How is that changing your artistic voice?
The sense that we could make a difference, that we could share stories and we can promote dialogue. I think that's what's so beautiful about art is we're not necessarily just saying, well, it's this black or white situation, but rather it's much more nuanced and there's different ways to think about it. And you can think about it any which way that you want to, but that we can promote these sort of dialogues that seem to be a bit of a lost art these days.
Absolutely.
We obviously played plenty of pieces that had messages and stories, but having a little bit more intentional focus to find the pieces that can really say something and that we can help deliver them. And I think that being able to make that impact has been really invigorating for us.
That's terrific. I didn't realize that it had put a thumb on the scale for you all in that way. That's really exciting.
Sounds Current is a production of the Del Sol Quartet and the Del Sol Performing Arts Organization. Del Sol is Catherine Bates, Benjamin Creeth, Haeyoung So-yoon, and me, Charlton Lee. This podcast is produced and edited by Andrea Klunder at the Creative Imposter Studios. Technical direction by Edwin R. Ruiz. Additional production support from Alex Riegler. Cover art by Felicia Lee. Our theme music was composed by me and performed by Del Sol Quartet. Angel Island was composed by Huang Ruo with generous funding from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, with additional funding from the Phyllis C. Wattis Foundation and the Clarence E. Heller Charitable Foundation. Special thanks to Andrea Fellows-Feinberg and Don Feinberg, who believe our stories are worth sharing. And thank you to all of our guests and collaborators in the ever-expanding world of Angel Island. You can find links to all of the resources and partners mentioned in this episode in the show notes in the episode description in your app and at delsolquartet.com delsolquartet.com/podcast. To learn more about Del Sol Quartet and the Angel Island Project, visit delsolquartet.com.